Okay, here's the story of Sophia and the landscaping menace, crafted to meet all the specified requirements. The Springfield sun, a hazy orange ball through the perpetually pollen-dusted air, seemed to mock me every morning. Another day, another symphony of lawnmowers and leaf blowers orchestrated by my neighbor, Mr. Henderson. Henderson wasn't just a landscaper. He was a one-man ecological disaster, a walking, talking embodiment of suburban blight, operating his entire chaotic enterprise from the house 2 doors down. I'm Sophia, 35 years old, and until the world tilted on its axis with the arrival of the pandemic, I worked as a network engineer, bouncing between our downtown office and remote sites across the county. Life was manageable then, a steady rhythm of troubleshooting routers, attending meetings that could have been emails, and the occasional happy hour. Henderson was a low-grade annoyance, a persistent hum beneath the surface of my otherwise predictable life. The problem wasn't just the noise. It was the sheer volume of his operation. 7 vehicles, each in a different stage of decay and disrepair, cluttered his driveway and spilled onto the street. There was a rusty pickup truck perpetually leaking oil, a trailer overflowing with discarded lawn furniture, and, the bane of my existence, a hulking stake-bed truck that seemed to possess a gravitational pull for discarded appliances. Every Tuesday, trash day, Henderson would embark on his scavenging expeditions, rumbling through the neighborhood before dawn, scooping up refrigerators, washing machines, and the occasional derelict water heater. Then, with a complete lack of consideration, he would park that monstrous truck directly in front of my house. Not occasionally, every single Tuesday. I endured it for months. I tried politeness. "Mr. Henderson," I'd say, forcing a smile as I dodged his overgrown rose bushes, "would you mind parking somewhere else? It's a little inconvenient." He'd just grunt, a sound that could mean anything from agreement to outright dismissal, before returning to whatever mangled piece of metal he was currently dismantling. I escalated. I left notes on his windshield, typed in my neatest font, pleading with him to consider my convenience. I even offered to let him use my driveway for a short period, just so he wouldn't block my access to the street. The notes vanished, presumably into the black hole of his truck's interior, without eliciting any change in behavior. The final straw was the trash. It started subtly, a stray plastic bag here, a rogue styrofoam container there. Then it escalated. One morning, I found a discarded toilet seat nestled amongst my petunias. Another day, it was a moldy mattress propped against my mailbox. Henderson's trash was migrating, staging a hostile takeover of my perfectly manicured lawn. I confronted him again, my voice rising in pitch despite my best efforts. "Mr. Henderson, this is unacceptable. Your trash is ending up in my yard." He just shrugged, a dismissive gesture that sent a spray of rust flakes cascading from his overalls. "Wind probably blew it," he mumbled, before disappearing into the depths of his garage. I called the police. I called parking enforcement. I even contacted the Homeowners Association, a notoriously bureaucratic organization that moved with the speed of a glacier. The response was always the same: sympathetic sighs, promises to look into it, and ultimately nothing. The police informed me that there were no parking restrictions on his type of vehicle. Parking enforcement agreed, unless he was blocking the fire hydrant, there was nothing they could do. I felt helpless, defeated. Trapped in a Sisyphean struggle against a man and his mountain of garbage. I considered moving, selling my meticulously decorated house and escaping to a place where landscaping was a crime and trash trucks were outlawed. But I loved my house, loved my neighborhood, and refused to be driven out by a horticultural barbarian. Then came the pandemic. The world shut down. I packed up my laptop, my ergonomic keyboard, and my collection of stress balls, and retreated to my home office. Working remotely was a mixed blessing. I missed the camaraderie of my colleagues, the free coffee, and the occasional escape from the confines of my house. But I also relished the solitude, the ability to work in my pajamas, and the absence of Henderson's incessant noise. The company still required me to go to our remote sites if there was a failure. So, I kept the company service vehicle at my home. I was allowed to use it for personal errands if it was on the way to or from a work task, until trash day. One Tuesday morning, the familiar rumble of Henderson's truck jolted me awake. I watched from my living room window as he made his rounds, scooping up discarded treasures and adding them to his already overflowing load. I saw him approach my house, his eyes scanning the curb, a predatory gleam in his gaze, That's when the idea struck me. A deliciously petty, exquisitely satisfying idea. I waited until he had reached the end of the block, his truck groaning under the weight of its cargo. Then I slipped out of my house, hopped into the company's service vehicle, and drove slowly down the street. I chose my spot carefully, positioning the van directly in front of my house, leaving just enough space for another vehicle to squeeze in beside it. But there was a catch. The remaining space was directly adjacent to a bright red fire hydrant. I knew Henderson. He was stubborn, predictable, and pathologically incapable of walking more than a few feet. He would never park legally down the street, would rather risk a ticket than exert himself. I retreated back into my house, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. I knew what I was doing was wrong. It was passive-aggressive, childish, and potentially illegal. But after months of enduring Henderson's inconsiderate behavior, I couldn't resist. I waited. And waited. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. I paced my living room, checking my phone every few seconds, my nerves frayed. Finally, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Henderson's truck, its engine sputtering and wheezing like an asthmatic dragon. I peeked through the curtains and saw him maneuvering into the space beside my van, his tires bumping against the curb, his engine straining. He had taken the bait. He had parked in front of the fire hydrant. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling slightly. I snapped a series of photos, carefully documenting the scene. Henderson's truck, the fire hydrant, the red zone painted on the curb. I made sure the license plate was clearly visible. Then I composed 3 emails. One to parking enforcement, one to the police department, and one to the public relations officer of the local fire department. I attached the photos and wrote a brief, neutral description of the situation. I hit send. Now, the real waiting began. Hours ticked by. I worked, or at least pretended to work, my mind racing, my ears straining for any sound of activity outside. I imagined Henderson returning to his truck, finding a bright yellow ticket plastered to his windshield, his face contorting in a mask of rage. I imagined the police arriving, sirens blaring, to impound his vehicle. I imagined the fire department using his truck for a training exercise, smashing it to pieces with their axes and hoses. Okay, maybe that last one was a little far-fetched. Around noon, I heard it. A series of loud bangs followed by a torrent of shouting. I crept to the window and peered outside. Henderson was standing beside his truck, his face red, his fists clenched. He was yelling at my front door. I opened the door but kept the security screen locked. "Can I help you, Mr. Henderson?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You," he roared, his spittle flying through the mesh. "You did this. You parked your stupid van there on purpose. You made me park in front of the hydrant." "I parked my van in front of my house," I said calmly, feigning innocence. "There were plenty of other spaces on the street." "No, there were," he sputtered. "You blocked them all. You did it on purpose." "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice hardening, "I suggest you calm down and move your truck. You're illegally parked." "Going to report you to your company?" he yelled. "See if you like getting fired for using company property to harass people." "Feel free," I said, shrugging. "But I think they'll be more concerned about you blocking a fire hydrant." The argument escalated. We traded insults, accusations, and threats, our voices rising until they echoed down the street. I stood my ground, refusing to back down, fueled by months of pent-up frustration and a healthy dose of righteous indignation. Suddenly, I heard the wail of sirens in the distance. They grew louder, closer, until a police car screeched to a halt in front of my house. 2 officers emerged from the vehicle, their expressions grim. One approached Henderson, his hand resting on his holster. The other approached me. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his eyes scanning the scene. "This man is harassing me," I said, pointing at Henderson. "He's angry because he received a ticket for parking in front of a fire hydrant." The officer turned to Henderson, his expression hardening. "Is that true?" he asked. Henderson sputtered and stammered, trying to explain his side of the story. He accused me of setting him up, of deliberately creating a situation where he had no choice but to park illegally. The officer listened patiently, his face impassive. Then he turned back to me. "Ma'am," he said, "can you tell me what happened?" I recounted the events of the morning, carefully omitting any mention of my carefully orchestrated parking scheme. I emphasized Henderson's history of parking in front of my house, the trash that had mysteriously appeared in my yard, and his generally inconsiderate behavior. The officer nodded, his expression thoughtful. He took my statement, then spoke to Henderson again, his voice low and authoritative. After a few minutes, the officer returned to me. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to have a little chat with Mr. Henderson." We also received a call about a possible weight limit violation for his truck on this residential street. I suggest you go back inside and relax. I retreated into my house, my heart pounding with relief. I watched through the window as the officers spoke to Henderson, their gestures becoming increasingly animated. I saw Henderson's face contort in a mixture of anger and disbelief. Finally, the officers left, Henderson looking defeated. I didn't know what they had said to him, but whatever it was, it seemed to have worked. A few days later, I received a letter from the city. Henderson had been fined for parking in front of a fire hydrant and received a legal notice stating that he was not permitted to park his commercial vehicles on any residential street. He could stop to load and unload, but he could no longer use the street as his personal parking lot. For the rest of the time I lived there, until my company moved me overseas, Henderson's truck remained confined to his driveway, a silent testament to my victory. And while he never apologized, he also never parked in front of my house again. Neither did any of the other neighbors. The Springfield sun still shone, the pollen still fell, and the lawnmowers still buzzed. But now there was a newfound sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing that even the most persistent bully could be defeated, one strategically placed service vehicle at a time. My petty revenge was complete. The end, or so I thought. Years later, after I had moved, I was looking at some pictures on my phone when I saw the ones I took of Henderson's truck that day. I paused for a moment, remembering. That's when I saw it. Partially obscured by leaves, a second fire hydrant was just a few feet away. Henderson could have moved the truck forward less than 5 feet and avoided any parking violation. He was too lazy, or perhaps too mad at me, to notice. My petty revenge was even pettier than I had imagined.